when she is, so it's ready?
Okay, it's live.
Okay.
Hey, this is Jen. I'm gonna duck really quickly to let my dog out, but I am still here and will be running right back.
Okay, and you already have been in one of these before, so you know some of the guidelines.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out why my Zoom has now permanently changed my name to display my birth date with it. So I got to figure that one out first, because I definitely did not need that on the town YouTube channel.
I was gonna say I can change that. Oh, you have already done it. I was gonna say I can change that, but you guys should be ready to go now.
Okay. All right. Before we get started with the meeting, I'm just going to go over a few protocol issues with this first Board of Adjustment meeting for the town of Hillsborough using Zoom. Any discussion items, anyone wishing to speak needs to visibly raise their hand to be recognized by the chair. This will help limiting us talking over one another. Anyone participating without video should announce themselves at a break in discussion. Like this is, I think everyone's got video, so, but just announce yourself. This is X, I'd like to add. When you're making motions and seconds, the member should raise their hand to be called on by the chair. A member needs to state their name before stating their motion and before seconding a motion. When voting, all votes must be by roll call. So I will call the name of each participating member to ask for a verbal vote of yes or no, aye, or an abstention. Regarding public comment in general, any members of the public may provide written I don't need to add that here, sorry. Let's see. And also I need to note the planning board meetings will be live streamed on the Town of Hillsborough YouTube channel. And I believe that stays on the YouTube channel for a while after this meeting. So with that, Dave, I'll turn it over to you to start the actual meeting.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the Hillsborough Board of Adjustment meeting for August 12th, 2020. Confirm we have a quorum of all 5 members present. Next agenda items. Yes.
I'm sorry, I need to get the roll call.
Okay.
So Dave Remington.
Here.
Sean Kehoe.
Here.
Bill Harris.
Here.
Jen Sykes.
Here.
Dustin Williams.
Here.
So we've got a quorum.
Okay, sorry about that. So the next,
No, that's okay.
so the first item on the agenda, are there any changes to the agenda?
No, sir.
Okay, so do we need a motion to approve the agenda? We're just good to go then?
No, we don't normally make a motion to
Okay.
approve the agenda. We
Okay.
will need a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, yeah, it said approval on there. I just wanted to make sure there
Oh,
wasn't some change.
I'm sorry, no.
Okay, so the next item is review of the minutes and approval. Does anybody have any corrections to the minutes? Bill Harris.
I noted on paragraph 6A, other business, on the first sentence, there's a typo. It says, King noted that Remington had pointed out an error, but we left off the D at the end. So just a typo.
I'll fix that.
Other than that, I have nothing else.
Okay, does anybody else have anything else? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes with that one correction. See Jen Sykes' hand up, so. Jen,
Move approved minutes as amended.
okay, nice. Bill, I saw your hand go up.
I'll second the minutes approval.
Okay, so
Just to be on the safe side, David, you made the motion well, you entertained the motion.
yeah, Jen made the motion. Bill Harris seconded.
Seconded, and we need to take a vote. Dave,
Okay, you want me to take the vote or you chair that?
I'll call it out. That
Okay,
might be.
okay, go ahead.
So David Remington,
Aye.
Dustin Williams,
Aye.
Sean Kehoe,
Aye.
Bill Harris,
Aye.
Jen Sykes.
Aye.
All right, thank you.
Okay, the motion carries. The minutes are approved. All right, my page changed on me here. Okay, so the next item is the hearing case BA 01-2020. This is an appeal of the HDC denial of a after the fact certificate of appropriateness for 330 West King Street to allow the replacement of an upper story wood double doors with 2 wood casement windows and matching smooth hardy siding on the front facade of the house. The appellants are Susan Leaf, am I pronouncing that correctly? And Arthur Axelbank. I guess, let's see, the first thing I think I need to do is ask if any board members have had any ex parte communication on this matter. If nobody has, I'll, okay. I don't see anybody saying they have. So does anybody have any conflicts of interest? Dustin,
No.
Sean, Bill?
No.
Jen?
Nope.
And neither do I. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to open the hearing.
Second.
Who is the first?
Oh, I thought you made the motion.
No, I'll entertain a motion.
Yeah, who's making the motion to
I
open?
motion that we open the meeting.
Okay,
Second.
Okay, Dustin made the motion, Jen seconded. All in favor, let's see,
Yeah, let's take the vote. David,
yes.
Dustin,
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
Bill,
Yes.
Jen.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, now, and Beth Trejos, I'll trust you to jump in if I do anything inappropriate and keep us on the straight and narrow here. But,
Yes, Mr.
so
Chairman, I
this-
will.
So,
And if I can interject just one thing,
yes,
I would just ask, the applicant and Mr. Hornick, when they introduce themselves, to please confirm their consent to participate in this virtual hearing.
okay. So this is a hearing on the record. There's no need to swear in witnesses, as I understand.
Right.
But so first, let me ask, so Tom, is there anything you want to say at the start here?
Beth, would you like me to give any background, how we got here? I'm introducing the staff report into the record that everyone has a copy of, that was emailed out on August 6th. Should I give any background, Beth, or? I mean, everyone's had a chance to read the materials.
Right. I mean, I think the materials can speak for themselves. And it might make sense to have the applicant come forward and make their presentation to the board.
Okay, if we're ready to do that, then yeah, I'll let the applicants unmute themselves and go ahead and, or the appellants rather, present your case.
Thank you, Mr. Remington. I'm Arthur Axelbank. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Arthur
Yes.
Axelbank.
And Mr. Axelbank, as you introduce yourself, would you please confirm your willingness to participate in the hearing virtually?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I signed a written consent to participate virtually. The person next to me, my support person, is my daughter, Rachel Axelbank. She is not expected to speak as she did not sign anything. The co-applicant is my wife, Susan Leaf. She's co-owner with me and my lifetime spouse. She's not present, but I'm speaking for both of us. So thank you for allowing me the chance to appeal our decision from the Historic District Commission. By way of introduction, I also want to thank the town staff, which included Justin Snyder and Tom King, who were very professional with us and gave us the information that we needed without any bias, et cetera. And I'm just appreciative as a town citizen of the professionalism and skill of our town board and our town staff. And of course, I've known Margaret Houth for years, and so her reputation speaks for itself as well. So we've lived in this house for 37 years, and this problem comes in the roof that overlies our front porch, which is on King Street. And I presume if you all have read it, I'll just sort of go very briefly through it. In the center of the porch roof, right over the front door, there's what they call a widow's walk. I'm sure there's a technical name for it that I don't know, but it's a part of the roof which is mostly has a slight pitch to it. This part of the roof is horizontal without any pitch. And right against the wall are two out-swinging double doors. And they've been there since we've been in this house, which is 37 years. Over these years, it has continued to be problematic in terms of causing a leak. And we've had 2 or 3 different roofers come and make repairs for us. And each time, after a certain amount of time, the leak recurred. That was impossible to waterproof the doors where they open out into the over the porch. And so what happened this year was we realized, unfortunately, that besides the leak that was happening on our outside porch, that it was damaging the sheetrock inside the house, right over the front entranceway to the house. And so I don't want to call it a panic, but we did want to act quickly to repair that. And we got a contractor who was very skilled and told us that the way to repair it is to remove the doors, that there's no way to waterproof those doors, as we had learned the hard way over the years. And so he recommended we replace the doors. The doors had 2 matching windows, replace the doors with just windows alone and siding. And we went ahead and did that. And I want to add that we did not intend to violate the rules. And very quickly we were informed that we had done it without applying to the HDC for this, and we regret that. And I don't believe that the HDC ruled against us because we had to have approval after the fact. And I think I was dealt with fairly all along. We paid our fine, and we understand that we should not have done it after the fact. Nevertheless, we were in that panic to get the repair done. And Mr. Snyder said, get the repair done, and then do your appeal after the fact, which is what we did. And so in our view, the HDC ruled against us in a 5-0 decision, basically saying that we had to return the appearance of the front of the house to what it was before we did that repair. Our problem with this, frankly, was that the house has had several iterations over the years. Before we were there, the house is obviously close to 100 years old, 90 or 95 years old, and parts have been added onto the house over the years, I guess before there ever was an HDC, and many of these decisions were just made based on what the house needed. So adding on a side porch, adding on a 1-story kitchen, all these things that were not there when the house was first built in the 1920s. And so to me, the arbitrary part of the decision is why have it revert back to this appearance that was only there for 37 years when there's really many appearances of the house that were changed without these limitations. And so that's the arbitrary part. The part that I felt was capricious was when we talked to HDC, and I see that Ms. Heilman is here, which I'm glad, we talked to them about the fact that there was no way to have the doors be waterproof. The suggestion was that we should put up some type of facade that looked like doors. So basically take whatever material was acceptable and plaster something on top of the siding that was not really a door, but just looked like a door to have that appearance. And that was the part that I felt was capricious, that just was something that was random in order to arbitrarily go back to this appearance, which was before we did the repair. And lastly, I'll say that the appearance now, although I guess this is the part that could be contentious, is the appearance is not very different from what it was before we did the repair. Yes, you can stand in the street and you can see that the doors are not there, that there's just siding there. We matched the siding perfectly and the windows are there. And people walk by and there's really no difference in the appearance of the porch roof, which we were able to preserve, the columns on the porch roof, the windows below the porch roof, the underside of the porch roof, and the entire appearance of the porch when you walk on King Street is really just the same as it was, you know, for these 37 years that we've lived here. And so in our opinion, and the reason we're here on appeal is because we feel that the windows that we replace the doors with is not a significant aesthetic change, and that it looks the same and it preserves the porch. Otherwise, there's no way to have the porch doors be waterproofed. And what was suggested to us by the HDC was just to plaster something on there. I'll use that word, not plaster, but to put something on there that quote, looked like doors so that it would match the appearance of what it did before we did this repair. And so that's our position. Like I said, try to keep it brief. I appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Axelbank. Does anybody on the board have any questions for Mr. Axelbank? Bill Harris?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions that I would just like some clarification on. Are we good, David?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So one of the things when I was looking at, you know, the arbitrary decision, you know, the characterization that some of it was arbitrary. And I looked at the regulations, the historic designs that they have, the design guidelines, and you know, it specifically clarified front-facing, character-defining walls and appearances, as opposed to some of the, you know, back things like you had talked about, the kitchen and other additions that were put that were not on character-defining walls. And you know, it appears that what they've done, their ruling is based off of what's in the design guidelines, but that's based off of what the Secretary of the Interior had put in their guidelines, you know, for the whole United States, basically as just recommend. I mean, I know it's recommendations, it wasn't a law. So would you still, or what is your feeling given that it's arbitrary when it is on a character defining wall, which is what the others weren't, the other additions that you talked about weren't, and the town is simply adopting and applying and then enforcing, you know, guidelines that were put out by the Secretary of the Interior, basically for the whole United States. So I don't understand necessarily why that would be characterized as arbitrary. And so I wanted to give you a chance I wanted to ask you about that.
Thank you. I think I understand your point that in my examples I gave of the parts of the house being added on that are not considered character defining walls. I must say I'm certainly not an expert. I'm not a builder. I don't really know what that.
Neither am I.
I don't really know what that means, but I don't know if it just means that does that mean the front of the house, or does that mean something structural? But I guess my point is not so much about whether those examples I gave are different places. It just had to do with the fact that we're being asked to revert back to something that was one moment in time, and that's not any more important than perhaps some of the other things that were done at other moments in time when the house was 5 years old, 10 years old, 50 years old, and now 90 years old. And so I don't really understand why reverting back to that, in my view, since I've been here 37 years, you know, it's the 37-year point that I have to revert back to.
And,
Go ahead, Bill.
I didn't know if any, I didn't want to just, I don't know if Jill is, I see that she's on there from the HDC. I don't know if she's allowed to talk, or Bob, are you speaking for the HDC? Okay, so Bob, my question then, when I go through the design guidelines and I look at things, so what are the considerations for safety, you know, in a building? And then are there any considerations for, you know, old or poor construction? I mean, just because something was put on a housing unit, you know, 100 years later, we may just look and say, you know, that we wouldn't do that today, and it's not safe and doesn't meet, you know, our safety and those type of requirements that we have now. So I'm trying to balance, what considerations do we have for that?
Bob, before you answer, will you also, okay,
Yeah, before I start, I want to make sure I get on the record. I'm Bob Hornick. I'm the attorney I'm the town attorney representing the HDC tonight. And on behalf of the HDC, we consent to this remote meeting.
Okay.
Bill, thanks for the question. First of all, in the guide, I have a prepared argument that I'll go into afterwards, but I'll respond to your question. The guidelines themselves are not safety based, okay? But during the proceeding itself, when Dr. Axelbank and his wife brought up the safety concern, one of the things that the HDC talked about, and this kind of gets back to part of what Dr. Axelbank said, is like, he suggested that the HDC just throw up something that looks like a door. Well, part of the discussion in front of the HDC was there are fixed doors. They look like doors, but are actually windows that would address the safety concern that the Axelbanks, Dr. Axelbank and his wife had, having a doorway at the end of the hallway. That doorway had been there for at least 37 years. And we think on that front wall had been there for as long as the house had been there. And there was nothing that the HDC said that suggested that the door had to be replaced by a functioning door, which was the safety concern. That there could be kids up there or someone running down the hallway, running through a broken door. What the HDC said was, HDC is concerned with the aesthetic, historic character of the exterior of the structure. The HDC basically said, did you explore replacing the door with something that was visually the same as the door, but was fixed in place? I mean, I have some of them at home, things that look like doors, but are really, they're full-length windows, essentially, that are glass framed in wood. So that's a long way of saying, I suppose, that while the guidelines do not focus on safety features, they focus on appearance mostly, the HDC itself, during the discussion of this particular application, did consider the safety factors. And that was one of the factors that led them to recommend the consideration and to ask the Axelbanks about the consideration of replacing the door with a fixed door that appearance-wise from the outside looked just the same as what had been there before, but functioned like a solid wall or like a window instead.
Okay. Okay, another question I had was with regards to the design and things, that the design guidelines, what I read in the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines, said that changes like the Axelbanks has made should be avoided. Didn't say that they couldn't be done, or it just said that they should be avoided. Are there circumstances under which the change like they have done is acceptable? I mean, where do we draw the line as to what is acceptable and what is not acceptable?
Well, I don't think you get to draw that line. I think the HDC gets to draw that line.
Well, I think aren't we drawing that line? Won't we be drawing that line today too in hearing this appeal?
Well, in my opinion, not if you're doing your job right. No. And that's
Well,
part of my argument. You know.
I'm sorry, Mr. Orlick, I couldn't understand what you said. What was the last thing you said, in my opinion?
I said, in my opinion, if this Board of Adjustment is exercising its authority properly, I said, if you're doing your job right, that might have sounded a little terse, but if you apply the standard properly, I don't think you have the authority to change. Just because you disagree with the HDC's decision, I don't think you're allowed to decide differently than they decided.
So let me just interject, and Beth can correct me when I'm wrong here, but our role here is to look at whether the HDC made their decision according to appropriate ordinances and basically according to their guidelines that form the basis for their making decisions on applications.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not would we make the same decision, but did they make their decision in appropriate accordance with their guidelines?
Right. And what the courts tend to say is that there is deference to the decision making of the HDC, provided you find that it's supported by evidence in the record.
Yeah, I'd like to suggest, the arbitrary and capricious standard basically is unless the HDC's decision is whimsical. That's the word the court uses to describe the phrase arbitrary and capricious. You would have to determine that the HDC's decision was whimsical, has really no bearing or no basis in fact, in order for you to overturn that decision. And, again, I'll get into this a little bit more in a few minutes, but based on what the guidelines say and what the law says and what the evidence was that was presented to the HDC, I would submit that it would be improper for the Board of Adjustment to reverse the decision because the HDC's decision was not whimsical.
Okay. So, well, Mr. Axelbank wants to.
Well, just because
I want to remind everybody that we're still in the mode where we should be asking the appellants questions based on their testimony here. So, Mr. Axelbank, go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't equate whimsical, arbitrary with whimsical, but I don't want to talk about semantics. I didn't think the HDC was whimsical in any way. I thought my experience, they were very thoughtful and serious in taking the job and taking on the question. I would never want to imply that I thought it was whimsical.
Okay. So, does anybody else have any questions for the appellants? Mr. Kehoe, John, I saw your hand go up first.
Dr. Axelbank, my question or questions are about the specifics of the replacement. I have a background in carpentry and building, and it obviously 95-year-old wood can get soft and punky and rotted, and things do need replacement. And in reviewing the materials, I did pick up that you made the effort that the windows that were installed were the same size as the windows that were in the doors previously. Now, the windows themselves, are they single pane lights, or are they the 3/3, as I believe was replaced?
I think I understand your terminology. They're single pane.
Okay, and that on that note, something I did also pick up in the materials was that when replacing out of just age and maintenance, it is clearly stated that the replacement needs to be of the like, whereas you can't replace a 3/3 with a single pane. At any point was that a conscious decision to go with a full light window, or was that
It was not done purposefully, only that it was done expeditiously. So and just to respond to that, yes, I understand that difference, and that difference is, I think, maybe a stronger, honestly, a stronger argument than having to replace something that looks like a door.
I can understand, not wanting to leave a leaky feature in a house to then ruin interior, as you said, drywall that can be a can of worms you don't want to leave open. Yeah, I was focused on the actual physical specifications of, if you do have to replace, it's stated that you need to replace with something, because it's facing the street, it needs to be the same aesthetics, the same look as what you're replacing. Even if it is going with a faux door versus a functional door, it still needs to match what it's replacing. That's all I have on that point.
Okay. Jen Sykes, I saw your hand go up too.
Yeah, and my question's in some of the same vein as Sean's, with based on the pictures we have in the packet. First off, does the windows do look different between the pictures? But secondarily, I know there's talk about trying to put plaster in, but the one that's on page 44 or listed as 11, they look a bit bigger for some reason. Is that just because it's the construction photo? Because in short, I'm wondering if, based on the picture, it doesn't look possible to do the plastering suggestion, but I want to confirm that. And then secondarily ask if you've had time to do any investigation into what's entailed in doing plastering and how that would potentially impact some of the safety concerns you've raised and damage to the sheetrock you've mentioned.
The windows are the same size. I think it's a little bit of an optical illusion, maybe in the photos, but and I will say the thing about having the triple pane, that, when I went into the HTC meeting, frankly, I thought that was actually, it would have been a legitimate suggestion, but the suggestion to put in the faux doors, we didn't see how that would really answer the problem. I didn't understand what you meant, Ms. Sykes, about the plaster. Did you say plaster?
Yeah, they were talking about just putting a plaster overlay, and you've kind of addressed it, that there is space between that eave and the window edge. But have you had time to look into what the cost would be to, one, do that kind of overlay on the siding so you could install some kind of sort of picture thing around it? And two, would it have any detrimental impact potentially to what the pre-existing damage? Would it cause any further damage, in short, to the lower floors and the sheetrock you've already had damage to? And the right answer might be you haven't had time to look, and you don't know.
Yeah, we had to scramble to meet the deadline to make this appeal, and so we have not looked into that. And I understood that bringing up the cost as one of the arguments was not really in the domain, that the HTC and the Board of Adjustment was not in position to judge whether the cost. So we have not, although yes, as homeowners, I'm sure anyone who's a homeowner knows that cost matters, but we understood that the cost was not going to be an argument that we could make. So we have not looked into any of the cost.
Okay. This is my first appeal of an HTC decision I haven't had to recuse myself from, so I'm learning that too. But that, I think, covers everything I was going to ask about on this one.
Okay, any other questions? Dustin Williams, did you have anything?
No, I think I just have a comment in response to something Jen said, but I don't know that this is the time for that.
Okay, yeah, we'll have our time for deliberation.
I mean, I guess I'd like to know more, I think, on exterior walls, exterior walls and window and door guidelines. There's this definition of technically feasible, and I guess I'd like to know more about what the town's threshold for technical feasibility is. Because I think that's a key phrase for me.
Well, when we get into the town's case here, we can make sure we get that. Sean Kehoe?
Question for Dustin. Are you referring, I've got the materials up. Are you referring to what's labeled handwritten page 40, window and door guidelines?
Page 41. Yeah. Page 20 of the Historic District Commission guidelines, specifically on the fifth clause or point.
Then we are on the same page. Just checking.
And it shows up again, not on the, yeah.
Okay. Are we good to go then? Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Dr. Axelbank?
No, nothing for Dr. Axelbank.
Yeah. So I'm asking Dr. Axelbank if you have anything else you want to say before we go to the town's position on this.
No, only that if the issue is about the windows and the triple pane, that's much more to us a reasonable, I don't want to call it a compromise, but I guess I just say that, as opposed to the idea of the faux doors.
Okay, so let's go on to the town's presentation, and there will be time after that for Mr. Axelbank for any rebuttal comments. I believe I think that would be appropriate at that point. So there will be that opportunity. So, so Bob Hornick, did you want to go ahead and say what you?
Thanks, David. I do, and once again, I'm Bob Hornick, the town attorney on behalf of the HDC. And I want to start off, I'm going to give you a little bit of dry stuff, a little bit of law, just so that you have a little bit of background about what the HDC's function and authority is with these kinds of applications. First of all, the general statutes provide, and this is in General Statute 160A-400.9. Beth, your attorney, could fill you in on that if there's any questions about that. It provides that, and I'm going to skip over some unnecessary language, but it says that no exterior portion of any building or structure located in the historic district shall be erected, altered, restored, moved, or demolished until after an application for a certificate of appropriateness as to exterior features has been submitted to and approved by the HDC or the Historic District Commission. The same statute, same section goes on to say that exterior features shall include architectural style, general design, general arrangement of the exterior of a building or other structure, including the kind and texture of the building material, the size and scale of the building, and the type and style of all windows, doors, light fixtures, signs, and other appurtenant fixtures. So the appearance of windows and doors is clearly within the purview of the HDC. And when those things are going to be changed or altered on a structure in the historic district, a COA, a certificate of appropriateness, is required. Now, I also want to make sure I say at this point that nobody on the HDC and nobody here, I think, feels as if the Axelbanks were trying to get over on anybody. I mean, I just think that there was an emergency situation they felt like, and they had to do something about it, and this is what they did. So that, you know, I want to make that clear. That was never part of any discussion. Now, subparagraph C of the very same statute provides that prior to any action to enforce an historic district ordinance, the HDC shall, among other things, prepare and adopt principles and guidelines not inconsistent with this part of the general statutes for new construction, alterations, additions, moving and demolition of structures in the historic district. And we have, and what the HDC applies in these situations are the historic district guidelines that have been reviewed and approved by the town board. So they are incorporated by reference into the Unified Development Ordinance. So the guidelines are the law with respect to changes in the outward appearance of structures in the historic district in Hillsborough. Now, the general statute, let's go on to the UDO, Unified Development Ordinance, section 2.5.1, subparagraph A, provides that the HDC has the power to pass upon the appropriateness of the alterations of a building on a property located within the historic district. So the town board, consistent with the general statutes, created and empowered the HDC to create and enforce the historic district guidelines in Hillsborough. So I just want to make sure we're all clear on that there was statutory authority. It was exercised in Hillsborough. The guidelines were created. They were approved by the town board. They were applied by the Historic District Commission in this case. Let's look at some of those guidelines. And they're in your record at pages 40 and 41, I think. And these are the guidelines that were specifically discussed and relied upon by the Historic District Commission when they were reviewing this particular application. On, let's see, page page 40.
Bob, can I ask, do you mean handwritten 40 or PDF
Yes.
40?
I'm talking about handwritten 40. And I'll refer to both page numbers. It's handwritten 40 and page 19 in the guidelines themselves. You know, there's a
And
whole
it's also, may I add, it's also page 74 in the PDF. So,
I put together with Dustin's assistance the record on appeal. That is everything that was before the HDC when it made its decision. And that starts, I don't know what page it starts on in your PDF, but it's about 30 pages in.
okay, yeah,
You've got a table of contents. And then you have
Okay.
pages 1 through 40 something, I forget, 49, I think. So those page numbers were the ones that were handwritten on, all right?
okay, we can go with those, that's fine. I just, so we're, as long as we're clear. Tom has his hand up, Tom King. And he's muted.
Wrong button. Do you all want me to try to put these pages up? Okay, so I'm gonna try this. I haven't done it, but well, I've only done it one time.
Let me just ask while he's doing that, does everybody on the board have a copy of the, either printed or on their screen available to them? Okay, I think I see nods and thumbs up. I don't think we need to worry about it, Tom, if it's any hassle at all.
Well, David, I would ask if if Jill and Dr. Axelbank have it available.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Dr. Axelbank, do you have this available, or would it help to have it up on the screen? And you're muted, Doctor.
Yeah, I'm unmuting. I'm looking for it. It was in the email, right? I just didn't print all the pages. I'm sure I can come up with it.
I understand that it was delivered to you by email.
Okay. Okay, let's give
Proceed.
Tom, let's give Tom a minute to see if he can pull it up, just so it's up for everybody. And if not, we'll stipulate that we've got it somewhere.
23, right? I'm getting there.
David, I just want to tell you, when you see me looking off, it's not because I'm not paying attention. It's because I've got my document up on another computer off here to the side.
Okay, well, I'm flipping back and forth between windows on mine too, so.
Okay, Tom, can you scroll back a page to page 40? Okay, right there. In the paragraph, again, we're looking at page 40 in the handwritten page numbers on the bottom of the page from the record. And I want to read an excerpt there. Windows and doors require relatively high maintenance to keep them fully operable. However, if they're well maintained and promptly repaired, they will continue to function indefinitely, blah, 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 blah. If they're allowed to deteriorate to the point of requiring replacement, it is important to replace them with new units that match the original dimension, design, material, sash, and/or panel configuration, detail, texture, and color. So right there in the guidelines, there's a statement, part of the ordinance approved by the town board, that says that if a door in the historic district needs to be replaced, it ought to be replaced with a new unit that matches the original dimension, design, material, sash, etc. So that's what the HDC was relying on in part when it made its decision. Tom, can you roll to the next page, which are the specific guidelines themselves? When we look at that, guideline number 1 directs you to retain and preserve windows and doors that contribute to the overall historic character and form of the district building. Now, and one of the questions was asked before was, well, is this a character defining location on the building? And we would submit to you that it was on the front facade of the building on King Street, the main street in town. Certainly, it was a door on a character defining facade of the building. And by the way, the definition of character defining is found in the guidelines. I'll read it to you. It's on page 75. Now, this is not my handwritten 75, but it's on page 75 of the guidelines. It says, character defining means architecturally refers to features or details of a building that are significant in defining its architectural or historical character. And here, the HDC determined that the door and the window that replaced it was part of a character defining feature of the Axel Banks house, the front wall. Going back, Tom, if you will, to page 41, we're still looking at the windows and doors guidelines. Thank you. Guideline number 5 instructs us to replace in kind any portion of a window or door that is damaged or deteriorated beyond repair. Match the original design, material, etc. Guideline number 7. It is not appropriate to compromise the architectural integrity of a building by introducing or eliminating historic window or door openings on character-defining elevations. And that's precisely one of the guidelines that the HDC discussed and relied on in making its determination on the Axel Bank application. There was also some discussion about the applicability of the exterior walls guideline. And Tom, if you scroll back up to page 38 and 39, because obviously the door that was replaced by this window is on an exterior wall. and pages 38 and 39 in your record, which are pages 17 and 18 of the Historic District Guidelines, provide guidelines for exterior walls. In the first sentence, with respect to, on page 38, with respect to exterior walls guidelines, says, exterior walls establish the overall form and massing of the buildings. The decorative features reflect the architectural style of the building. Guideline number 1 on page 39, next page, Tom, states that we should retain and preserve exterior walls that contribute to the overall historic character and form of a district building, including their functional and decorative features and details. The HDC relied in part on this guideline in making its determination. The HDC looked at, among other things, the photos that are on pages 11 and 12, handwritten, of the record. Page 12 shows a photograph of the doors from June 2019. Page 11 shows a photograph of the windows that replaced, there we're looking at the windows that replaced the door. It was the HDC's determination based on the discussion at the meeting, based on these photographs, and applying the guidelines we've already spoken about to the facts that were presented to them, that replacing the door with these windows was not congruent and that was not in keeping with the requirements of the historic district, and therefore the HDC denied the application for certificate of appropriateness. And I submit to this board that the HDC's decision is supported by the evidence in the record, is supported by the guidelines, and is in no way arbitrary or capricious. The HDC never suggested to the Axel Banks or anybody that they just throw something up there. The discussion with the HDC was that the doors or something that appeared the same as or very similar to the doors that were removed could have and should have been put back where the door was removed and the window was placed to replace it. The decision was not whimsical, and I know Dr. Axelbeck agrees it wasn't whimsical. It was a reasoned, reasonable decision, just he disagrees with it. The HDC offered the fixed door as a potential compromise and said to the Axel Banks that they got until December 31st to come back with some alternative solution to these windows. That decision, we submit, supported by the facts and the applicable law. That being the case, this board is not authorized by law to substitute its judgment for that of the HDC's, even if they think they would disagree with the HDC. You just don't have that authority to substitute your judgment for the HDC's in this case. And for all those reasons, I think that, and I suggest to this board that you need to uphold the decision of the Historic District Commission. And anyone has questions, I'm here to do my best to answer them.
Okay, I saw Bill Harris's hand go up.
Well, I mean, I agree with everything that you said, Bob, in terms of the regulations of what's in the design guidelines. There's no doubt that that is obvious and it's there. The question I have is that the Axel Banks are appealing on the fact that it was arbitrary. Your argument is that because it is so crystal clear in the regulations of what's required that it can't be arbitrary. But one of the decision, or one of the definitions of arbitrary, is the unrestrained and autocratic use of authority. So what I'd like you to do is give the position as to why you think, given the Axel Bank's concern about safety and the water damage and that sort of stuff, why enforcing those rules on them is not arbitrary in terms of an unrestrained and autocratic use of authority, making them put in something that they feel is not safe or in the best interest of the structure of the home.
Well, part of it, Bill, to be quite honest, is, when you buy a house in the historic district, part of what you're buying is the obligation to comply with the historic district regulations. And I think everybody knows that. With respect, and let me add that it was crystal clear at the HDC hearing, and I think the record reflects this, is that had the Axel Banks come before the HDC before doing this work, these windows would never have been approved. They would not have been approved because of the same exact regulations we're talking about.
So the town's position is that the timing didn't play a role in it?
Excuse me?
The town's position is that the timing of the request did not play a role?
No, definitely not.
Okay. I'm not as convinced from the record, but.
Well,
Let me just add,
Mr. Axelbank wants to speak.
this
Go
is
ahead.
this is an
Doctor.
important thread and I don't want to interrupt it. I just want to insert one small thing, which is the photos that are being compared is really not comparing apples to apples. So with your permission, I just want to put up a photo of the way it looks now.
I object. You can't do it. It's outside the record.
So
There cannot be new evidence presented to this board at this hearing.
That's correct. The argument must be based on the materials that are in the record.
I
And I'm
would,
not sure that we need those pictures, Mr. Axelbank. I
Yeah.
think the record is pretty complete in terms of what it looks like. So
I would point out too, looking carefully at the photo from when it was partially done there, that going to Jen Sykes's comment, I realized looking at that you can see a little bit of the slope of the porch roof below the window there. What you don't see is the flat part behind it, I believe. So that's the reason the reason it looks like that window is coming almost down to the porch roof is that there's if I understand right, Dr. Axelbank, there's a flat area back behind that's this Widow's Walk area, so that we're not looking at the very bottom of the wall there. Is that correct?
I think there's hardy plank beneath that window. There's several layers of hardy plank beneath that window before you reach the top of the porch roof. I think that's what you're saying, Dave.
yeah, I think there's about 2 feet below that. From the bottom of that window down to the Widow's Walk or roof of the porch, it's about 2 feet, I would guess.
So I have a couple of questions here about that. So in looking at the record, I don't think am I correct in not seeing where it's the use of hardy plank that's the issue. In fact, if I understand one thing in the record that I didn't see contested anywhere from Dr. Axelbank is that the rest of the wall there already was hardy plank. And so it's not the siding material that's used, it's the fact that it's siding at all instead of
Yes,
door.
and I understand the objection. I'm showing the photo. This is the photo because this is what it looks like now, because the perspective of the photo that was taken while construction was going on is way magnified, so you can't see the difference. There's about, I think there's 3 feet, whatever the distance was from the bottom of the window to the bottom of the door, that's the distance that's there now.
If I might, I suggest that we now look at page 12, handwritten from the record, because that's the photograph that is almost the same perspective. And you can see the,
Yeah, that's actually taken from farther back, so you can
right.
see the level piece there. So I've got so my next question, Bob Hornick, is, so suppose that 25 years ago, this the double doors had already been replaced with a window, that for whatever reason that had been allowed. And what if the applicants now, or the appellants now, had decided, we want to go back to the double doors that were already there to make it more historical? Would that be something that would be acceptable within the HDC guideline?
Well, I guess I'm not positive about the answer, although I do know that one of the considerations by the HDC is that when there is a change in the exterior appearance of a building, they do not want you to go back and falsely recreate in, say, 2020, the appearance of something that had that you add in 2020 to make it look like it was built in 1920.
Yeah.
But you know, I want to make perfectly clear for everybody, you know, if you guys disagree because you think that the windows look okay, you're allowed to disagree about that, but you're not allowed to change the HDC's decision on that basis. Yeah. You're not allowed to do it.
Yeah, and that's not my intent. My intent is what what the baseline is that the HDC would use. I mean, obviously the fact that this had already been would have already been replaced with hardy plank. I guess they're not going to go back and say, well, anything else you do needs to go back to the kind of wood that would have been there in 1920. So so I guess that's,
I mean,
my question is, where does their what are the boundaries of their jurisdiction as far as stuff that may have been changed from what was historical, and what if this, I'm asking, what if this were the reverse thing, that for whatever reason there had already been changed out for windows in fairly recent times, and they decided, well, we want to go back to the doors because we've got old photos that say that's what was there in 1925 or whatever. Would that?
They might allow that. They might allow that. Again, applying the guidelines to the facts that are presented to them, which is exactly what they did here. They applied the guidelines to the facts, the real facts that were presented to them.
So my last question is, suppose that had been done and then the HDC couldn't go to them on some other application and say, well, we really think you ought to put this back to being the doors that were there before. They can't insist on that if it had been already changed to windows.
Well, if it had been changed to windows with the HDC approval. I mean, the historic district regulations went into effect in Hillsborough in 1973, I think. And I'm sure the guidelines were created more recently than that, but there's been some regulation in Hillsborough's historic district since it was created in the early 70s.
Okay, I don't mean to belabor any of these points. I'm just trying to see kind of what the boundaries are of the authority, and kind of, I mean, this goes to the question that the appellants are asking about changes that have been made at various times probably a lot of them before the HDC, maybe some of them after, I don't know. But at what point at what point does something become historic that falls within their purview?
Well, I mean, generally speaking, I think the period is anything that's more than 50 years old has, is potentially historically significant. I think that's I may be misstating that, and I don't want to misstate that, but I think that's the period of anything that's more recent than, closer to now than 50 years ago is not considered to be as historically significant as features, structures, et cetera, that are at least 50 years old.
And in cases like that, if this were a newer house, less than 50 years old, just something I'm a little unclear on, does the HDC have jurisdiction at all over things? So they still do.
And depending on whether the building or structure is historically significant, or even new construction in the historic district has to come before the HDC for a COA to make sure that the new construction is historically in character, is congruent with the district.
Okay. Well, I guess we dealt with that a few months ago. So okay. Yeah. So Jen Sykes, I see your hand up. Unmute yourself.
Yep, I've got a couple of them as well. The first is just for clarification with character defining. So in the picture that Tom just had up, I will admit, when I read through the packet, I looked at that picture and struggled to find where the double doors were the first time I looked. They're pretty obscured by a tree. Does that have any bearing on the definition of character defining? Because it is obscured. It does not look clearly visible from however far off this is. So does that have any bearing on the definition of character defining, since it's not really visible? Maybe in winter.
Well, I think my answer to that question is, when you look at the definition of character defining in the guidelines, it is referring to the feature of the structure itself.
Okay.
It doesn't, it doesn't consider, that there might be a tree between the sidewalk and the structure. It considers the feature of the structure itself.
Mm-hmm.
Character defining architecturally refers to features or details of a building that are significant in defining its architectural or historical character.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. My second one comes to the point that I think it was Bill who asked this earlier about clarifying that really the historic district guidelines don't talk about safety. And I know you pointed to bullet point 7 on page 41 about it is not appropriate to compromise the architectural integrity of a building by introducing or eliminating windows or doors or openings on character defining elevations. So I know it says that, but again, what if and I know Dr. Axelbanks has raised a safety, or there's been damage to the sheetrock, et cetera, that can have some impact on, does the house cave in, et cetera. So I'm just wondering, where does how is that congruent with, say, building code? Which precedents?
Obviously, whatever they did here would have to meet code.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, the record before the HDC indicates that there was nothing in the record that showed there was any consideration of other alternatives that were more door-like, that included the safety features that the Axelbanks say they were concerned about. I mean, and we know that there are other types of materials that could be handmade. I mean, Sean Keogh might be able to do it himself. That you could, I mean, you said you have experience with this kind of carpentry, perhaps. You could fabricate a door or something that looks like the doors that were removed, but is solid, safe, watertight, airtight. But there was never, nothing about that was ever presented. It's not on the record in front of you.
And kind of my last question, are there other examples in the historic district of these fake doors? That kind of plaster type thing that was mentioned in the minutes as a suggestion from the historic district. Does that exist anywhere else in it?
There was never any suggestion by the HDC to do plaster, never. And I don't know where you get that in the record.
I thought I read the word plaster, but just kind of creating the facade maybe. But
Yeah,
are there examples of that? Okay. That covers mine.
Okay. Any other questions for Bob Hornick? Okay, I think it would be appropriate to give Dr. Axelbank any opportunity he has to, if there's anything you want to rebut or restate on about anything.
I don't think so. That was certainly a detailed presentation. It's hard as an amateur for me to, rebut much of it, only to say that we still did not, and we still do not believe there's that much aesthetic difference, certainly in the appearance. And it seems like it's basically a technicality, whether it's a door or siding. And I don't know if the word facade, I don't know what that means. I guess it's not plaster, but it can be made of something. And we were directed to speak to the town staff, I think that Justin Snyder, and get advice about what we should do in terms of finding something that would be acceptable. And then we have to go back and submit another COA. I'm a little concerned about the deadline of 6 months, but I can take that up with the HDC. Again, we don't think there's that much aesthetic difference. And the change was made for the safety and for to avoid further water damage. And it seemed to me to be arbitrary to suggest a facade, which is no one's suggesting, I guess, that we put in doors that open outward like there were for those years that we lived with it. And my wife is fond of saying that she came home once with our small children, the doors were blown open, and she was worried about, somebody wandering out there. So I don't think anyone's suggesting that, but then suggesting that a facade of a door is going to be preferable to the siding with a window, just to me seems like it's missing the point, which is that the aesthetic is not that different. And I'm sorry that I didn't submit a photo sooner. I understand that we're not to admit any evidence at this point, but the photo that was shown is a magnified photo in the middle of construction, which doesn't really do it justice. So, and that's all.
I think we understand that point. That's well taken. Tom King, you have your hand up.
Bob, can the photo that Dr. Axelbank showed, could that just be for clarification rather than new evidence?
I won't object to it for that, just to illustrate for illustrative purposes.
Okay, unless there are more questions, so we'll keep the hearing open in case there are. Keep the hearing open in case there are questions for either party here as we deliberate. But I think it's appropriate for us the board to start deliberating now. Bob Hornick. Yeah.
I just want to make one last comment. The issue before you is not whether you think that window looks okay. That is not the standard.
Yeah.
The issue before you is whether the HDC's decision was arbitrary, capricious, and it wasn't. And the record demonstrates that. And I just want to make sure that this board doesn't go down the wrong rabbit hole. you should affirm their decision. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think we're clear on that point that, and so that, we're reviewing the record, and did the HDC make the appropriate decision based on the UDO, which references the guidelines. So basically, they consistent with their guidelines in making their decision. So let me open this up to the board members and to ask for your thoughts on this.
Okay.
Yeah, Bill Harris.
For whatever reason, okay, well, Jen was going to try to beat me in. Do you want to go first, Jen? So my honest opinion is looking at it, I mean, clearly the regulations say what Bob said. I mean, they clearly identify the situation that says, if it's old and rotted, whatever, replace it in kind. That's very obvious. The only question that comes to my mind is because there's no discussions about safety and that sort of stuff, is whether or not it is arbitrary in the definition of the autocratic use of authority to make them do, something other than windows. When they had an experienced contractor come in, give a proposal, say this is the best way to fix it, they should have gone to the HDC first, got it, and all that sort of stuff. The only question is whether or not, it was an overuse of the authority that they should have given some safety considerations. That to me is the only question. But the regulations are very clear in terms of what should be done. Okay, that's it for me. Jen?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just pulling back up the notes from the historic districts meeting. They cite the regulations and have relatively good interpretation of it. I think the big thing is that, again, that safety issue, the structural integrity, building code issues, that the exact same doors seems like it might not meet some code issues, might not meet some structural integrity issues. And they've got some time to come up with something that fits with both looking like what they used to have, but solving that problem of not leaking into sheetrock moving forward. But they're pretty clear. And as well as some of the details on the language. I know, Dustin, you brought up technical feasibility as one of those questions early on. I think that maybe doors might not technically be feasible for safety, but it doesn't seem that doors are mandatory from the Historic Commission, and that the rest of it is used to justify why what is there right now does not meet the standard of what looking similar enough to what was there and working in that way.
Oh, great.
Bill, go ahead.
No, Sean, go Sean.
Oh,
My
okay,
thought
Sean.
will hold.
Okay.
Well, piggybacking on what Jen said, it took me a second to find it. On page 39, handwritten, bullet point number 1, if we are to interpret these guidelines as they're written, doors might be mandatory. Now, taking the safety and current code out of the consideration, right up at the top, including their functional and decorative features. So if the way I interpret that is, if it was a door, it needs to be a door as a function. And a functioning door wouldn't be able to be opened by a child or blown open by the wind. But those, in my mind, that is all on the responsibility of parent of said child to not open the door and not walk out on the roof. But I think it should be pointed out that as these guidelines are written, if they are to be followed to the letter, a door should be replaced by a door. And if there is a compromise in making it a faux door, it still, those windows don't follow through with the 6 panes over a single pane. I think there is a big aesthetic difference that takes away from historic character. That's all I have, just piggybacking on that.
I think looking at it in person, I think it's an aesthetic improvement, or at least neutral, but we aren't to consider that. So I think I would almost, if I'm correct, the Historic District Commission, these are just minutes and not a transcription. Is that correct, Tom? I think I'd
That's
almost, I think there's just something for me that one of the first things the Historic District Commission mentions is the timing of the application and struggling with these after the fact applications. And I'd just like to hear more about, I'd like to maybe hear the full recording there to get a better sense of what's meant, and being certain that that isn't a consideration in the Historic District Commission's decision, because I think the property owners paid the appropriate fine for doing things out of order, but I'm just not certain without seeing fuller transcription or hearing the recording that I know enough to know that didn't play a role in the HDC's decision. Tom?
I'm sorry, Dustin. There was a YouTube link in the staff report that would have taken you to the meeting where you could, I don't know if you caught that or.
No, I didn't.
I just have.
Did everyone get to take a look?
Said that he didn't feel like he was being penalized.
Well, I guess I'm just saying, if I'm here saying that I don't think it's arbitrary or capricious, there's something in the minutes that makes me want to hear the whole recording.
So, I think, Tom, go ahead.
The board has the ability to table the hearing to a date certain, to give everyone that didn't get a chance to watch the video a chance to do that before making a decision. Also, if Dr. Axelbank wants to have an attorney, he's welcome to make that decision too, and the board can table this to a date certain.
And I would object to that, and I would object to any continuance. I mean, we've all had our opportunity. The record's not going to change. And even if the HDC held it against the Axelbanks, which they did not, this record still supports the HDC's decision. You'd be, in my opinion, be committing error if you did anything but affirm the decision.
I'd like to make a couple of comments. So I think early on, Dr. Axelbank pretty much stipulated that he thought the board treated him fairly in that sense, and that he told us he didn't have the sense that that they were making their decision out of any sort of retribution about that. It is clear to me that the things that they cite that are cited in the minutes are things that go specifically to the guidelines, and the guidelines say those things. And I guess just one other comment, and then I'll yield to Sean Kehoe here. But to me, there's a subtle distinction between saying, just talking about something that's done whatever to look like a door versus what I read in the record that they were saying that you could have fixed doors. And I think when I put that with the guidelines where it says, to find the spot here that trying to think that basically I'm trying to think, but it says something about replacing with material that's, you know, with something that's similar in material to what was there before. Okay, I see where I'm looking. Yeah.
It's on page 41 on the guidelines for windows and doors.
Yeah, match the original in design, material, dimension, sash or panel configuration, detail, texture, and color. So basically, you know, like I interpreted what they're saying in terms of fixed doors in that context. It's got to be something basically similar in material to what a door that would replace this is, but something that's engineered in a way that it can't be bumped open, because it really, you know, can't open. And I think, I mean, maybe that's going quite a ways on their part to say that that's okay, but it seems like a concession to me to practicality and safety as opposed to something that's capricious. So Sean Kehoe, I saw your hand go up, and let me recognize you.
Well, a comment and a question for Dustin. The comment being, taking time to digest the transcription won't change the guidelines as they're written, and it won't change the fact that the replacement window doesn't meet those guidelines. My question to you, Dustin, is you mentioned something in the minutes made you balk. Are you able to quickly highlight what that is that makes you want to hear the full transcription?
Yeah, let me take over the screen. Or Tom, if you want to go to screen two. It's Heilman said she struggles with after the fact applications.
Tom, it's on some earlier pages. It's on page. That quit showing me page numbers.
There, you're there.
I might be able to elaborate on that if you want me to, or would allow me to.
I mean, I think that would
I'll
just
allow
be
you to
clarification.
elaborate.
I don't think it would be part of the record based on the earlier standard we applied.
Well, I agree with you that I suppose based on that standard, I think she was, and I was there, she was, I think, commenting on the fact that after the fact applications are always difficult. I mean, they just are for a whole bunch of different reasons, you know, largely because it puts the HDC in a bad spot. It makes it difficult to say no for work that's already been done. It's what makes this situation all the more difficult. So the board members struggled with it. And that's exactly what Jill was saying that night.
So given that we've let you comment on how you remember that, I'd like to ask Dr. Axelbank if he concurs or heard that a little bit differently in the meeting.
Well, I will say I'm not eager to table this, although I appreciate the offer. I don't feel I need an attorney. I guess if I felt I did, I would have brought one. I wondered whether the HDC, held it against us that we had done it after the fact, that perhaps it had ruffled some feathers, so to speak. It's a small town we live in. But I said we paid our fine, and I honestly did not think there was going to be a different outcome if we had gone before. So in that sense, I do agree with Mr. Hornick. It doesn't change my position that the aesthetic is not that different and that we had to do what we did. The idea of having doors, whether or not they're fixed or not, it can't be doors because there's no way to really seal the bottom. So we'd have to have something that is attached to the framing and attached to the floor joists or whatever is holding up the rest of the wall there. But the part about the after the fact, for us, it does look like it does create a larger expense. But like I said, I would not use that in my defense. I have too much integrity. So.
Jen Sykes, do you have your hand up?
I was going to piggyback off something Sean had said, and Dr. Axelbank actually just kind of raised the same point I was saying. It's the safety issue, which the historic district doesn't define, but could impact the suitability of the house to prevent further damage, which supersedes some of the historic district pieces. It's the bottom of the floor that I would worry more about than some of the, does it fly open, can it stay shut? It's that gap where it has to slide open that will probably be causing more damage. I am not a construction worker, but I have had that problem, unfortunately.
Bill Harris?
Maybe, I mean, we're all beating around kind of the same thing. Listening to all the discussion and everything that I had looked at, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, at least to me, that the HDC did what they were supposed to do, and they followed the design guidelines and the ordinances and things that they were supposed to do. The question is some of the things that aren't part of their consideration, and that's the safety issue. And the homeowner went for the safety, what they considered, what they need to do for safety. That doesn't necessarily match with what the HDC looks at in terms of compliance with the guidelines and the aesthetics and things like that. I actually kind of agree with both of them. But I think maybe what we can do, I mean, Mr. Axelback still has to go back to the HDC by December, which means he's going to have to explore, if we uphold the HDC, he's going to have to explore it. He's going to have the opportunity to have some people come in, and then he's got to go back to the HDC and he can say, I've had 3 people come in and look at this, and not a single one of them tells me that they can do, a reasonable job, for water integrity and all that stuff. And then he has the opportunity to have that discussion again with the HDC in terms of whether or not the proposed solutions that they've come up with, are congruent with all of those considerations, with safety, with structural integrity, with design guidelines. And if he has the opportunity to do that, the HDC has the opportunity at that point too to say, we'll give you a co on that because it just doesn't work. Or they could just look and say, no, we don't care, you still need to do this. And then you've got to go with it. But listening to everything, it seems pretty clear that, at least to me, like I said, that they did what they were supposed to do. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Okay, Jen?
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think I genuinely have no idea how on page 41 of the historic, handwritten 41, bullet point 7 is even feasible in light of safety. I think that's a bigger statement about the historic district guidelines, but yeah, the don't compromise architectural integrity. Like, yeah, if you've got this kind of sheetrock damage, I have no idea how that sentence can be congruent with building code, but that is not what we're discussing. So I agree with Bill. If we hear this again in January, that the historic district's talking about it has to be a door, then somebody needs to examine this more in depth about incorporating some safety features, but that's not for us to do, but I would agree.
One thing I saw in the minutes, they were saying is one person was saying they don't buy the idea that a door, that the door can't be, the idea that doors cause leaks. Doors need to be maintained and serviced. People have doors in their houses. So I think the point being that there's at least a belief there that there are solutions there with integrity, and hopefully that can be explored thoroughly, and there can be some sort of solution that works, that is safe and meets the basic requirements of replacing a door with something in kind. John Kehoe.
I just think we need to take a second and remind ourselves that we're not here to kick around hypotheticals, that we're here to weigh this case, look at the guidelines, and make a decision on whether or not the HDC did their job correctly. And I feel like we're getting off in the weeds in a couple different directions, and we should try to refocus.
Yeah, I see I think you make a good point there.
I will say, just in general, I feel like sometimes we put the onus on the property owners to demonstrate that they've met certain things. And I would just generally like to see the HDC do more to document the historical nature of things in these findings. Tell me why this door is historically significant, why a casement window that is featured on several houses in the historic district is not. That's not relevant for this. That's just a general comment.
Yeah, well, you're basically arguing with the guidelines themselves, and I think that's.
Well, I was just making more of a general, like, I think the way these things always come through us is the onus is on the property owner to prove that it's historic, and not necessarily on the historic district to prove why it's historic. I think the only thing I see is that some of them are on the town's original elevations, but I think that's the closest it comes.
So basically what's before us here at this point is a motion either that the HDC followed their guidelines and made a decision within their legal authority, or that they did not. That's basically the motion we need. Am I saying that right, Beth? Or Tom, or anybody?
Yes, I think that's a fair representation.
Tom, did you have something you wanted to say?
I was just going to remind, after you deliberate, if you'll make a motion if everyone's finished, to close the hearing, and then, I mean, you can leave it open and close the hearing at the end, but.
Yeah, the order I had on the sheet you gave me was make decision, close hearing, but I don't know. Is there any preference for what's more legally appropriate? Tom?
Stick with the sheet.
Okay. Okay, would somebody like to make a motion either direction? I think I know where that.
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
I'd make a motion that we uphold the HDC and that they, conducted their hearing and their review of the case in accordance with their, legal and their legal responsibilities.
Okay, we've got a motion. Sean?
I second.
Okay, so motion by Bill Harris upholding the HDC's process, seconded by Sean Kehoe. Discussion? Tom? Tom, did you have something?
It was me, just making sure we do the roll call when the vote.
Yeah, we will.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Okay, we ready to vote? Okay, go ahead and call roll.
Okay, David,
Aye, I support the motion. Yeah.
Dustin,
And I abstain. I think we've got a quorum without me, and I'd still prefer to see the YouTube video. But I don't want to vote no. I don't disagree necessarily either.
Beth, am I correct? An abstention is a vote in favor?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Really, you're, unless you have a conflict or a financial interest, or some other element that makes your participation unlawful, then you should participate.
I'll support the motion. Yes.
Sean,
Aye.
Jen,
Aye.
and Bill.
Aye.
Okay. So that
Okay, motion carries unanimously then.
Thank you, everybody.
And I want to say something to the Axle Banks. We sometimes have things that come to the things that we deal with originally that end up being after the fact things too. And I know it really is a struggle on our part, the thought of really hating to put somebody in the position of having to undo something they've done already. I know it's not something anybody takes lightly. And I hope that something workable and reasonable and safe that meets everybody's goals can come out of this.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, so the next item on the,
David, okay, I'm sorry, can you just close the hearing?
yeah, okay. So do we need a motion to close the hearing?
I don't believe so. I think that you can just declare
Okay,
the case closed.
okay, the hearing is closed.
Thank you.
My understanding is that you only needed me for this item. If that is correct, then I will say good night.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think that's correct. So
That's correct.
thanks a lot, Beth. Appreciate having you here.
Oh, nice to see everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Do people anybody need to take a break for a few minutes before we go to the next item here?
No.
Okay, I don't see anybody saying yes. Okay, so the next item, if I can go back to my agenda here, scroll up. So this is a quasi-judicial hearing. It's case BA 02-2020. It's a conditional use permit to Alamd Auto Trade, and I apologize if I'm saying that incorrectly. Abelnazer Resk, and this is a 960 Corporate Drive. And a request for operation of a motor vehicle sales and rental business involving use of an office space in the existing multi-tenant building at 960 Corporate Drive, and including the display of 5 vehicles for sale in a designated portion of the existing parking lot. So So again, I asked the question, has anybody on the board had any ex parte communication? That, no, I see shakes of heads, and so
So
let the record show everybody seems to have indicated no here. Are there any conflicts of interest? Okay, none appearing. I'll entertain a motion that we open the public hearing. Or do I do it again? I guess. Do I guess
you entertain the motion.
Pardon?
Someone makes a motion.
okay. Got
Is
Okay. Okay, Bill Harris made the motion to open the hearing. Do we have a second?
Second.
John Kehoe seconds.
So I'll take a roll vote. David,
Yes.
Dustin,
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
Bill,
Yes.
and Jen.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a quasi judicial item, so need everybody who's going to speak to this to swear in. So the people here who are plan to testify, maybe just hold up your hand so I know who's going to, okay, Tori Williams Reed, Tom King, and the applicants. Okay, so for everybody who held up their hand, do you hereby swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth as it relates to the case you are speaking to? If so, say yes.
Tom King says yes.
Tori Williams Reed, yes.
And see
Mr. Resk,
Mr.
do you
Resk?
agree?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So Tom, do you have to why don't you make your comments, introduce the item here? in the
Yes.
background?
First, I want to introduce the staff report that was included in your board packet into the record of the meeting. I'll go swiftly through some of this as much as I can. Again, this is a quasi judicial evidentiary hearing. The project title is Alhamad Auto Trade, or AAT. The applicant is Abdul Nasser Rezk. The property owner is 960 Corporate Drive LLC. Miss Reed's here on their behalf. The applicant is the tenant, current tenant, and they're requesting a conditional use to operate a motor vehicle sales and rentals business on the site. Per the applicant's application materials, they currently rent a suite 403 at 960 Corporate Drive, and they want to expand the business to include motor vehicle sales. Vehicles will be purchased from a dealer and relocated to the subject property where they'll be marketed online. The applicant requests a maximum of 5 vehicles that'll be parked on site in designated spaces within an existing parking lot. Appointments will be made for in-person vehicle viewing, and no mechanical repairs or service to vehicles will occur on the property. The location is there are 2 buildings on the property, 960 and 980 Corporate Drive. The lot is 1.9 acres in size. The current zoning is high intensity commercial. Existing land use, as I said, is 2 existing commercial office buildings. Surrounding zoning and land use to the north is county's jurisdiction with R1 and EC5 zoning. That's a commercial zoning district. They're manufactured homes and I believe it's a commercial garage or shop building on the existing commercial property. To the south is Duke Home Care and Hospice at Zone Office Institutional. To the east are more commercial and multi-tenant office buildings, which are zoned high intensity commercial. To the west are the offices of Orange County Schools. They're also zoned high intensity commercial. The future land use map designation for for this property and area's employment. The site's currently served with town water and sewer. One thing I will mention, the application, the conditional use permit application requires that a TIS traffic impact statement showing pre and post levels of service for public street intersections within 500 feet of any site driveway has to be submitted as part of a conditional use permit. That doesn't apply in this particular case. A traffic impact analysis is required for smaller projects that seeking a conditional use permit where the majority of properties being notified of the public hearing are of a different zoning category than the site requesting the development. So this is more of a small technical matter. The board needs to determine whether or not a TIA would be required for this site, given the proposed use. It's very small scale, but it does fall within that small development where the majority of developed property is in different zoning districts. There are a majority of the development properties, 26 out of 33, within the 500-foot mailed hearing notification area are developed and zoned differently from this property. I don't see this as a big traffic generator, but that is a requirement for a conditional use permit.
So Tom, does that mean we really have no discretion on this, that this needs to be done?
It's the requirement is on the application form for the conditional use permit only. It's not actually in the ordinance. So I think you do have general discretion to say, well, we don't think this should rise to the level of the need to have a TIA or TIS prepared.
Okay.
And you have done this in the past for smaller scale businesses. I mean, the project is a 120 square foot office unit in an existing multi-tenant building, and they're parking 5 cars in the parking lot. I've been to the site many times in the past. The parking lot's never super full when I've been there during the day. Most of this is going to be done online, and people coming to look at the vehicles or meet with the applicant to discuss the vehicle.
Okay. So now you also mentioned some waivers that.
Sure, I'll move on with that. So I think in looking at the application and reviewing it against the UDO, subsection 6.17, which is sidewalks and walkways, paragraph 6.17.2 applicability, says that sidewalks and walkways must be constructed as a part of all new developments. And then it goes on to say that for the purposes of the subsection, new development means a development project subject to any of the following. And one of those is a special or conditional use permit, including modifications thereof. So US 70A East is considered a low priority sidewalk segment. So technically, just this application alone, with it being a conditional use permit, makes it subject to the need for a sidewalk.
I have a question about the sidewalk waiver on this one, Tom.
Sure.
So since this is just one unit in a building, every time I've done this, we've been talking about it in terms of a new building and then its own the developer? Like, how would it even be assessed? Would it be just the linear frontage of the office space that they're leasing in the building?
It would be applied to the property as a whole.
Okay.
My thoughts on the matter, I mean, the board can require a sidewalk. They can require payment in lieu. You can grant a waiver from the whole thing. There's no physical construction occurring at this site. There's no building addition going on. That's usually where you would expect to find that being triggered with actual construction. So I think it's again, one of those items in our ordinance that should be clarified a little bit, but you do have the ability to grant a waiver from that requirement and we'll move on.
Okay. Jen, you have your hand up.
And just to clarify on Justin's point, it wouldn't be the business owner that would pay it. It would be the owner of the building. And those might not necessarily be the same things who would do the payment in lieu on the sidewalk.
I think
That
it would
would
have to
be
be the applicant who would pay
Yeah,
it.
but the applicant doesn't have any control over the property. Well, other than uses, not like improvement things.
I don't know. We can talk about this later, but this
Yeah.
is one case where I might be okay with this waiver.
And I'm just bringing this point up because I have a feeling I probably need to take that back to planning to think about.
Yeah, this seems kind of unusual. Let's see, is that all the waivers, or was there, no, there's another one, I believe. Right?
There was a waiver. And then we need to discuss the standards of evaluation for this type of land use.
Okay,
So in order for you to grant the conditional use permit, in addition to the general findings of fact that you have to make found in section 3 of the ordinance, this particular use is subject to use specific standards found in section 5, and specifically it's paragraph 5.2.29 motor vehicle sales and rental. And that essentially says the following specific standards shall be used to evaluate an application for approval of this use. The first is the outside display of vehicles between the primary facade, which is the facade facing the public right-of-way, and the street is limited to an area not greater than 5% of the gross floor area of the building on the site, or 20 vehicles, whichever is less. I'm going to attempt to share the site plan for this. Here we go. North is to the left, or my left, maybe you're right. If you're, I guess it should be the same.
Yeah.
So this is the site. This is Corporate Drive. This is US 78 East. This is the building. And this is where where it's located. And these are the 5 spaces that the applicant has identified as to where the vehicles will be parked. So the building itself, based on a 1997 site plan, the building at 960 Corporate Drive is 11,995 square feet in gross floor area. So 5% of that would be 599.75 square feet. I went out and measured this area, these 5 parking spaces on July 24th, and it comes out to be 663 square feet, which would be over 5%. So the question for the board is based on this standard that has to be met. The outside display between the primary facade of the building, which would be the front, and facing the public right of way, which is 960 Corporate Drive in this case, or the street, should be not be, is limited to an area not greater than 5% of the gross floor area of the building on the site. I guess you could argue that the cars are being parked in between these two buildings. You're really not gonna, it's not your standard automobile dealership situation. I guess the board needs to find out or needs to verify if they feel like this standard is being met with this particular proposal.
So I got a question, Tom. So the square footage of the building square footage that's based on, that's the building, the long building that's on the left that this would
Correct.
be in. It does not include the building in front of that.
No, it doesn't include the building in front.
And is the building in front part of the same development, same owner, same everything?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Could we argue that that's the standard that ought to be used, that it should include both buildings?
It doesn't really say. I mean, it says the primary facade, the facade facing the public right of way. If you can make the argument that you're going to include all of the buildings on site rather than the building the actual office is located in, then yeah, I guess you could say the standard's being met.
Oh, we can come back to that, I think. So then there's another standard
So the
we've
next-
got to evaluate.
Jen had her hand up.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I was.
And oh, no, and I know we've got the display up, so it's a bit different view. I know from planning, we've had discussions about this with the Chrysler Jeep Dodge that's going to be coming in around Sheep that was proposed to. And the discussion there with this waiver came into use and proximity to the road. Just providing some other considerations to think about with understanding this, some of the intent and the way something very similar to this waiver has been handled before by a different board. But it was brought up with that, like Tom said, the use is a bit different than some of what the UDO intends here. I know Margaret's on, she can correct me. I think this is only the second online auto sale thing we've even seen like this before, and this is the second one in a couple of months too. So it's a little more nebulous, in my opinion anyway, on some of this, and this is a new use that if we're going to keep seeing some of this, may need to clarify even more, but I just want to bring that up for consideration on this one.
And this one raises a bunch of questions for me, because which are you considering the street? Are we considering corporate, corporate drive as the street, or are we considering US 70 as the street, the main public access? And then you get into, the description here says outside display vehicles between the primary facade and the street. So if it's 70, then there's nothing. There's no vehicles. And, if you've got another building there where they're going to have the cars that's going to be covering them, you're still not going to be able to see them from the street. So there's a whole series of questions here.
Well, the building 960 faces corporate.
Right.
980 faces 70.
Right. That's why I ask. And then the other thing for me would be, what's the difference if there are already 5 existing parking spaces, if you have parked cars in them or, cars for sale in them? If the landlord doesn't have an issue with it, and from your other stuff, it's not going to use up any of the parking spaces they need to meet their requirements, I'm not sure that I see much to quibble about there, to be honest with you.
Let's move on with hear the rest of the
Okay,
the standards here, and then we can come back
Right.
to these points.
sure. The second standard is the outside displays shall not be permitted in designated parking spaces. Vehicles designated as available for sale, lease, or rent shall not be parked or displayed in designated parking spaces required to meet the minimum parking requirements of this ordinance. Staff's looked at this, the parking standards, using flex space, healthcare facility, office operations, offices and professional services, and applying them to this particular site. And, I've determined that the site has plenty of parking based on both of those or all of those particular scenarios. There are, 76 parking spaces on site. At the lowest number, which is flex space, only 54 would be required. So parking these 5 vehicles would drop the number of spaces down to 71 available for everyone else. So I'm not seeing that as a particular issue from my end. The third standard is outside display of vehicles available for sale, lease, or rent are considered parked cars, and display area must meet requirements for parking lots in terms of landscaping, vehicle maneuvering, and similar requirements. So this project was approved in the late 1990s under an old zoning ordinance, so they're expected there would be aspects of the site that don't comply with current UDO requirements. It appears to generally conform with the approved site plan from 1997. No site changes are proposed with the submittal, current submittal. However, if you take the display area itself, if taken as just the area designated for the display of the 5 vehicles, there are aspects of it that don't comply with the current UDO. Specifically, the drive aisle in front of these spaces is only about almost 21 inches in width. 21 feet in width. 25 would be required under our current ordinance. So this is another one of those standards that there needs to be some consideration of whether or not it's going to be applied, or is it really applicable in this particular case. I mean, it's an existing situation. Are there any questions? The fourth standard is that no service, maintenance, or repairs of vehicles is permitted unless approved as a combination use. The applicant has said that they're not going to have any maintenance or repairs of vehicles on the site. Lastly, applicant shall provide noise level documentation for any sound system used outdoors on site. The permit issuing authority may require any one or a combination of fencing, distance, hours of operation, and baffling as needed to minimize noise generated by such facilities. The applicant hasn't mentioned that they're going to have any outdoor speakers or anything like you would find at a large auto dealership. So I don't know that standard really applies in this case either. But it's the standards that you as the board those are the specific standards for the use you have to consider in granting the permit. And Dave, I don't know, at some point, do you want to have the applicant speak to their request before moving on any further? I think we feel like we did.
If there aren't any more questions for Tom right now, I think it would be appropriate to have Mr. Resk speak to this, and Ms. Williams, if she has anything she wants to say. So Mr. Resk, do you have anything you would like to add to this, or any something? You want
Yes,
us to
related
consider?
to the last standard for operation, which we're going to maintain the site clean and no noise. And also we focus on hybrid car and electric car. So no any oil leak or any missing or stuff. We don't wash even the car at the site. We wash it outside in the car wash, and everything will be clean. We are being here like 8 months now, and everything going well.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Resk? Okay. So does the owner have anything you want to, Ms. Reed, is that?
Yes, now we've talked about this extensively and what the landlord would require, and the quality of the cars have been assured that they will be good quality cars, and as you mentioned, no extensive noise. Basically, they would be another set of parked cars in that parking lot, and the landlord is okay with that.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so I think the main issues are that we need to think about is the sidewalk issue, and then some of these details related to the standards of evaluation. Should we talk about the sidewalk question first?
I'm fine with waiving this.
Yeah, it seems to me now that it almost feels like it would be double dipping in a way to require something now just because the specific use of existing buildings requires a conditional use permit. Presumably whatever, I mean, I don't know what happened when this was first developed, if it was before we had the current sidewalk requirements or not, but when this lot was developed, it seems like that would have been the time that there would have been either a requirement to put in sidewalks or payment in lieu. Wouldn't that be right? Yeah, Tom, could you?
Yes, the site plan approval was in November of 1997. I don't know exactly, under the old zoning ordinance, there was a provision that sidewalks had to be installed in all new developments. No questions asked. So I don't know if this was before the old zoning ordinance was amended to require that or not. So I'm speculating there. I would assume that and then the Board of Adjustment in 1997 reviewed and approved this site plan. There was no mention that I saw of any requirement for a sidewalk at that time. So my assumption is there was no requirement for a sidewalk.
Since I was here, I can speak to that if folks want me to.
Yeah.
I need to be sworn in first.
Yeah. Okay. Margaret, do you hereby swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth as it relates to the case you were speaking to?
I do. The Meadowlands subdivision was actually approved in a significant degree, actually before I started in 1991. So the site plans that came in 97, the subdivision, the sidewalk would have been required at the subdivision stage. And we did not have a sidewalk at the site plan stage in 1997. So we came really late to the sidewalk game. And that's why so many of our sites in town don't have them.
Okay, thank you. That's kind of what I suspected.
I just wanted to confirm so you weren't
okay,
operating on guesses.
Yeah. Bill.
Yeah, my opinion is kind of with Dustin, I think on this one, I would think that if we were going to require a sidewalk, and it would be the responsibility of the building owner. And I think at that point, it would be if they want to make any adjustments to their building or change the building, then they would be subject to that. But just because, one tenant wants to come in and do something and needs a conditional, that seems kind of arbitrary and capricious to me on our part to make them do that at this point. So I'm kind of with Dustin on this one, that I would go for a waiver on that particular requirement. But I'd love to hear what Jen has to say, because I know she's got pretty strong feelings on the sidewalks.
This is one, yeah, I'm with y'all on this, mostly because it's, how do you handle it in this situation? Who should have that financial responsibility? Would they pay for the amount of that single office, the entire building? Where would it even lay out if you wanted to do the build? There's too many unknowns to want to use this to open up that can of worms and try to set a precedent.
Yeah.
Tom?
The town board adopted the regulations, and so they said this is when it will apply. They give the Board of Adjustment the authority to, in adopting the ordinance, they gave the Board of Adjustment to grant waivers, just as they did themselves, from provisions of UDO Section 6, which this is a part of. And lastly, the question of who pays for it is kind of out of the board's purview. That's between would be between an applicant and if they're leasing property from someone or buying or whichever.
Jen?
Yeah, and just one other thing, I was trying to remember what this is zoned as. I know it's somewhere in the packet.
High intensity commercial.
Yeah, do we want to encourage walking in high intensity commercial? I know we have it, but
I would like to encourage walking everywhere. If this was a new building, there'd be a sidewalk going in.
John?
I'm thinking more about people doing trail walking from Forest Ridge over there.
But I mean, that could connect Forest Ridge or Fiore Hills to Sportsplex. I think
I would just love to see the sidewalk from Haven, where I know people who live there, who walk a lot, to be able to get up to the Sportsplex. But I think for one small piece of one building that happens because of the use, to require a conditional use permit is, to me, not the way to go.
Right.
Sean, you had your hand up.
It was about the sidewalks and living in Fiore Hills. Yes, there should be some way to connect I would like to see all of town connected via walking path. But I think it would be foolish to make one property owner pay for a section of sidewalk because one tenant wants to use it in a certain way. Jen?
And I think the way our ordinance is written, the sidewalk would have to go on Corporate Drive. It wouldn't go towards the Sportsplex, was the other comment I was going to make on this. But Tom might be able to correct me.
Tom, you have a correction on that?
Well, the sidewalk on 70A from Haven that connects over to Forest Ridge dead ends at this property. Then there's a gap between this property and there's some sidewalk network in Meadowlands. And then the new Orange County Sportsplex and their new addition, they installed sidewalk along 70A. And we have a project that's going to be coming for joint public hearing where there's going to be additional connection coming from the east to connect over to the Meadowlands. So there is, and there are crosswalks across 70 in that area, across the highways. So things are coming together there. So that's just an educational thing. Staff, myself, thinks this is not the situation where you require sidewalk. There's no construction activity. Now, someone else in planning and zoning may disagree with me, but you do have the ability to say yay or nay. this will be a section at some point that someone is going to probably be requested at some point or need to fill in the gap.
Sean?
There was a question, if hypothetically, if we were to deny the sidewalk waiver, would that sidewalk be installed on corporate and not 70A? That's my understanding, is it would be on corporate, which is inside that development, which wouldn't really serve the general public. Is
The
that
sidewalk would be on 70A.
okay?
Based on the, that's based on the what
The community connectivity plan.
connectivity plan, that's where the priority is. Okay. Okay.
And it's a low priority sidewalk segment.
Yeah. I think we've about beat this to death, and I think it's pretty obvious where we come down on that. So now we've got the standards of evaluation, and it seems like maybe the main potential sticking point there is the size of the parking spaces and whether they, it's in excess of what's allowed. And I think along with this, the piece of whether it's in front of, facing the street or between the two buildings. So I don't know, any thoughts on that? Is that an issue we want to raise? Jen?
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember when this came up for something on planning, and a lot of the discussion was you want to prevent having like a wall of cars facing the street. You want to prevent having sun reflecting off them. This is a much smaller use. It's smaller square footage difference. It's the issue of this is small scale, but written for something that might have, 20 giant shiny trucks reflecting the afternoon sun off of 86. They're just kind of different feels. So I don't have a major issue with this for this use and how they're being oriented and all that.
Sean?
Tom, earlier when you were running through the calculations of building square footage and the ratios for parking square footage, in my personal experience, I manage a property that has 5 separate buildings, and all of that square footage is combined to dictate the minimum number of parking spaces we must have. So for this, I know you did the one, I think it was building B in there, being the larger building, and that was the only square footage you weighed against the parking. Even if that were the case, I still feel that the waiver should be granted. But I think in this case, we should weigh the square footage of building B and the smaller building C when considering the parking. There was you raised another issue of the drive aisle being 21 feet versus 25 feet. And the only issue that I see there is on the owners of the vehicles they're trying to sell, having 4 feet less for someone to back into one of their brand new Teslas. So I don't think that should really be a heavy consideration on our part. I'm not the one that has to sell a vehicle that has people driving 4 feet closer to it. But the main point was the tabulating the square footage of both buildings versus one building.
I disagree with that. I think it should only be buildings that business occupies, but I like what the town includes about this being between 2 buildings and not between a building and a road.
Jen?
And I think I think I'm remembering this correctly, that part of the ordinance about why it's this way for cars is so that they also don't have like really tiny showrooms and just have a ton of cars out on display. It's something very use specific about large car dealerships, if I recall correctly.
Let me follow up on one thing between Sean and Dustin. They were talking about Tom, and I read it, but I just want to clarify the details, make sure that I've got it right. When you computed the number of parking spaces that they needed, you said you went through a whole series of scenarios. Did you include parking spaces that were required for both 980 and 960? So when you came up with your numbers, you know, the 71s, the 64s and all that stuff, did that include both of the buildings for all of the parking spaces?
Yes, because they all use the parking
So
spaces.
okay, so if we're using both of the buildings to compute the requirements for the parking spaces, then, and the car's going to be parked between the two buildings, then why would we not use the square footage for both buildings to compute how much area they could use for parking spaces? You know, if we used the combined buildings to determine how many spots they needed, seems that we would use both buildings to determine how many of those spaces they could use up for their cars.
I guess my concern would be then someone could use what we've decided here and put a car lot in Hampton Point in a small little 100-square-foot building and then base it on Walmart square footage.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
That's just why I'm concerned with that not being the reason we do it for precedent going forward. I'm generally okay with this based on what Tom put in the package.
Yeah, and the reason I did them separately is because one, you're having to consider the whole development as to whether or not it's going to meet its parking requirements, versus this one, it's talking about, it's specifically saying it's envisioning one building on a lot, and it's the building that this business is located in. That's the only reasoning. Now, was that good reasoning or not? That's debatable, and that's why we're discussing it, because it's your decision, not mine. I put the facts out there as best I can and let you all make the decision and do the right thing.
Sean.
Well, so if we're gonna only consider the square footage of one building, what's to stop us? I believe, Mr. Resk, you occupy 102 square feet of this building. What's to stop us from calculating their parking on the square footage they occupy, and then they would get half a parking space? I think it should be considered as the development and the parking available to all buildings and not just the one.
Well, the regulation, the standard does say that the primary facade of the building, if you're a unit in a multi-tenant office building, you may be in the back. I mean, I know what you're saying, but that's the reason, the reasoning behind it.
I feel
then there's
This is a unique situation.
Yeah, I feel like we're trying to apply a standard that was done envisioning a totally different building setup and everything else to this case. I would feel more comfortable saying what Tom suggested in the packet, that this is really in between those two buildings, and that's very, very appropriate thing, because you drive by there, you don't even see those spots until you're way past it and pull in, and then it's just there are parking spots that are there that are parking spots that are there anyway. So no new parking spots are being built for this. I just feel like the whole thing doesn't apply, and we can argue that they're between the two buildings and not facing the street.
I'm good with that.
Yep.
Sean?
I just want to ask a quick question. Do we intend on discussing all the waivers and voting on them as a whole, or, you know, putting the sidewalk piece to bed, voting on that, moving on to the parking, voting on that? Do we want to vote on individual waivers or all of them at once?
So these aren't waivers we have to vote on,
Yeah.
though.
The parking, the sidewalk's a waiver, and I think we can just make that as part of the motion. That's how we would usually do it. And then,
And I think that then the traffic survey also have to be a waiver,
Right,
David.
I did not talk about the traffic one.
okay, yeah, well, yeah, we'd probably better talk about that one too. I forgot about that. Tom?
Oh, go.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get my thoughts here straight together. The TIA, TIS, that's kind of more of a, in this particular instance, because of the scale of the use, we're not going to require that. Again, that's a requirement on the application,
Okay,
not exactly in the ordinance. But then there's this provision in an adopted street standards document that we have that I think that's one that you can just say, okay, we're agreeable to not
okay,
require that in this particular case due to its scale. Then the waiver from the UDO, section 6 requirement. I mean, you can vote on that separately, or you can just, you'll be addressing it in the
Yeah.
findings of fact when you.
I think practically speaking, that's the way to go. There's not a lot of disagreement over this. I think we can just,
I think if there's consensus on the board, you can handle that in the motion
yeah,
to make your decision.
Yeah.
Are there any other discussions or questions?
yeah, I think, so the two things that were potential sticking points, one is the number of parking spots and amount of space, which we've talked about. And I think the fact that this is existing buildings, existing parking lots, and it's mainly the applicant's own issues with, is there enough space to drive by their cars, that I think we say that that's something we don't need to worry about. So I'm not sure I don't know what findings we need to make on those things that,
Well, those are the standards of evaluation,
Yeah.
and in the findings of fact analysis that we'll get to next, it mentions section 6 and section 5.
Yeah.
So if you want to move forward with that,
yeah,
then you can kind of make your decision that we feel like this is section 5 has been met. We feel like this requirements in section 6 have been met with the provision of the waiver
yeah,
from the sidewalk requirement.
okay,
So the board, in addition to making those, agreeing to those 5 standards, that the application meets the 5 standards we just discussed, might have been 6, I'm sorry, not 5. The first general finding of fact the board has to make is that the use or development is located, designed, and proposed to be operated so as to maintain the public health, safety, and general welfare. Staff doesn't see where this is going to be detrimental to the public health, safety, and general welfare, this particular use. But again, that's staff's opinion. But that's the first finding you have to make.
and unless there's somebody else here that there's nobody else here to speak to that's offering any testimony to the contrary.
Yes, we don't have anyone
Yeah, so,
that I'm aware of that has signed up to speak.
does anybody have issues with that finding? Okay, I see a lot of shaking heads. Okay, next, Sandy.
So the second finding is the use or development complies with all required regulations and standards of the UDO, including all applicable provisions of Articles 4 zoning districts, 5 use standards, and 6 development standards, and all applicable regulations. So I've looked at it, compliance with section 4, that's the high intensity commercial zoning district. I'll just cut to the chase. The proposed use is a smaller scale commercial use with good vehicular access, and where located and how operated shouldn't negatively affect adjacent residential land uses located across US 78 East. So staff feels like this particular use meets the intent of the high intensity commercial zoning district. Compliance with section 5, that's what we've been discussing about those 5 specific standards. The amount of cars that can be parked between the primary facade and the street, et cetera. Then compliance with section 6. This is where we discuss the sidewalk waiver. So if you'll need to make a finding that the use, if that waiver is granted, then you can find that the project complies with Articles 4, 5, and 6 of the UDO.
Yeah.
So is there any discussion on that?
Yeah.
So the third finding you have to make is that the use or development is located, designed, and proposed to be operated so as to maintain or enhance the values of contiguous property, or that the use or development is a public necessity. Again, staff doesn't find any reason why this proposed use would injure the value of contiguous property. It's a relatively innocuous use. It's locating in an existing office park setting. I don't think the board can find that's a public necessity, like some type of town or county facility. So is there any discussion on that particular finding? So lastly, the use or development conforms with the general plans for the physical development of the town as embodied in the town's comprehensive plan. The town's comprehensive plan consists of about 6 different documents. One is the future land use map. This property is designated as an employment area. Staff, has found that the proposed use generally complies with the employment area land use classification because it's a small scale retail use. The display of vehicles will be limited to a small area and not readily visible to the surrounding streets. And the site has good access to the surrounding transportation network. As far as the Hillsborough Vision 2030 plan, staff wasn't able to find any goals or objectives that appear to apply to this particular use. Staff looked at the community connectivity plan. That's where the sidewalk issue comes into play, and the board's discussed that. I looked at the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. There are no identified recommendations in that appear to apply. And this property is not located within any designated neighborhood park district. And the last 2 plans were the US 70 Cornelius Street Corridor Strategic Plan and the Churton Street Corridor Strategic Plan 2006. And of course, this property is not located anywhere in that area. So those 2 areas. So the board has to make a finding that does the project comply with the comprehensive plan, which consists of all of these documents.
Okay, any discussion on that before we have a motion? Okay, let's maybe somebody want to craft a motion on this. Tom?
In the staff report, I've got a motion to approve with conditions, a motion to continue. Would someone like me to just share that? Someone can read it, and
Yeah.
It's kind of like a
Yeah.
canned.
I've got it. You want me to read? You want me to give it a shot?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Okay. So first off, before I begin, I'm going to apologize to Ali up front because I'm not sure that I will get all of these pronunciations correct, but I'll give it my best shot. So based on the testimony, or I moved that based on the testimony and hearing record before us, I moved to find pending application case BA 02-2020, Al-Habs Auto Trade by Abdel Nasser Rex, a request for a conditional use permit for the operation of a motor vehicle sales and rentals business with the outdoors display of no more than 5 vehicles on the property at 960 and 980 Corporate Drive meets the 4 standards for conditional use permits set forth in the Town of Hillsborough UDO, paragraph 3.9.3. Should I go through specifically findings of fact? We find that the use or development is located, designed, and proposed to be operated so as to maintain public health, safety, and general welfare. The use or this use complies with all required regulations and standards of the UDO, including all applicable provisions of Article 4, 5, and 6. That the use is located, designed, and proposed to be operated so as to maintain and enhance the values of contiguous property, and that the use of development is a public necessity, and that the use or the use conforms with the general plans for the physical development of the town as embodied in the town's comprehensive plan. Do I need to specifically mention something about the sidewalks?
I think that's the one thing we probably do need to specifically mention that,
Yes,
that
And
we think
we-
it's appropriate to waive the,
And we find that it is appropriate to waive the requirement for sidewalks as found in town ordinances at this time.
I can get that language straight to incorporate it. And you're basing that on the discussion that the board had
Correct,
relative to
Is
that, to the sidewalk requirement.
correct.
Sean, you had a question?
I was going to second the motion to approve.
Okay.
okay, so Bill Harris made the motion, Sean Kehoe seconds. Discussion?
I guess just to clarify, Tom, we covered all the waivers we need to mention, right? We just have to do the sidewalks. We don't have to do the traffic, anything about the 21 versus 25.
I think the board, you didn't grant any modifications in section 5, to any of the section 5 standards. You discussed how those standards apply to this particular use. So you're not setting a precedent. If something similar comes along, but there's a little bit difference, it's specific to the facts of this particular case. So you've discussed section 5, you've discussed the waivers in section 6. There's been no disagreement that you're willing to grant a full waiver from that. So I think you're good.
Okay, we ready to vote? You wanna?
I'll do a roll call
Okay.
vote. Dave,
Aye.
Dustin,
Aye.
Sean,
Aye.
Bill,
Aye.
Jen.
Aye.
All right,
The
that motion is
passes
unanimous.
unanimously. Okay.
Okay, Tori and Mr. Resk, I will be putting together a conditional use permit document that'll need to be recorded with the Register of Deeds office, and I'll get that to you and here in the next several days, and should kind of complete bring this process to a completion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to
Sorry.
meet you, folks.
Before Ali goes, okay, could you tell me, how do I pronounce ALHAMD? How's that?
It's pronounced as Alhamd Auto Trade or Auto.
Alhamd.
Yeah.
Okay, Alhamd. And then your first name, Ali, is much easier. What's the first name? Abdel Nasser?
That's him.
It's me,
Abdul
it's me,
Nasser.
Abdel Nasser, yeah. I go by Nasser most of the time. But you only see
Abdel Nasser.
my name.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you both. You're welcome to leave the hearing and get some sleep.
Thank you.
Thanks. You're
Great.
welcome.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Okay,
everyone.
bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay, now I think there's, okay.
Do we,
Order of business here next is near and dear to my heart.
Dave, do you want to just close that hearing?
Okay, yeah, okay,
Sure.
the hearing is closed.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. starting to say the next order of business is near and dear to my heart because it's election of a chair and vice chair. And my term is already up. I'm sort of like the Wile E. Coyotes who are run out off the cliff, but I haven't had a chance to look down yet, so I haven't fallen out. Specifically, I don't have a replacement yet, but hopefully that's going to happen soon. And somebody else's turn to step up and be chair and vice chair. Anybody? So I guess we can entertain nominations.
I'd like to nominate Bill Harris for chair.
Okay,
I'll second it if you want it, Bill.
sure. I don't know why. I'll nominate, I could do fair play and nominate Dustin in for the,
Be a waste of everyone's time. I'm a short timer too.
Yeah, we've got Dustin's.
well, so Sean
here
or
much
Jen,
longer.
Sean or Jen, do y'all want it? I mean, if you want it, you can, I mean, somebody's got to do it, so I'll do it if nobody else wants to do it, but I would prefer somebody else wanted to do it.
Chair or vice chair? I'm low man on the totem, so I don't know if I, paid my dues.
I don't even know if I can since I'm here for
I'm only like 2 months longer than you, Sean, so that's a pretty low bar, buddy.
I guess, Bill, since this is supposed to happen in April, if everything gets back on track in the world, which we don't know, there'll be another election in April. Jen, you're appointed I mean, someone from the planning board is appointed every March, I think.
Yeah.
So
I forget.
you could rotate off at some point, but in any event, I mean, Bill, I personally think you'll do, any of you would do fine.
Yeah.
I'd be happy as a placeholder.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen how I run meetings. I've set an awfully low bar. You guys will do fine.
That's fine, I'll do it. Sean, were you going to be the deputy then, or the vice chair?
I believe that's what I opened up
I
for.
nominate Sean as vice chair.
Yeah, and I'll
Okay,
second that.
let's take care of them one at a time. So we've got a motion from Dustin to nominate Bill. Is there a second?
Jen second.
I seconded.
Okay, so let's take a roll call. David,
Aye.
Dustin,
Aye.
Sean,
Aye.
Bill,
Aye.
and Jen.
Aye.
Okay.
Were you exploring the depths of your own self-deprecation there, Bill?
I think he was considering abstaining.
I think he was going to vote no.
And you've only seen me walking on the river walk, and you know me so well.
So we've got a motion from Jen to elect Sean as vice chair.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Bill.
So David,
Aye.
Dustin,
Aye.
Jen,
Aye.
Bill,
Aye.
Sean.
Aye.
Another
All right.
momentary hesitation there.
You'll all do fine.
Yeah. I have confidence in you all.
So sometime, I don't know, Sean and I will see if we can, maybe Sean and I, we can get together with you, Tom, or we can get together separately, because Sean still works.
Yeah.
So I'm retired. I've got lots of flexibility. So maybe we can get together and just talk with you about general stuff about how.
Well,
it's supposed to
yeah,
go and all that
how you feel like things could be improved, I'm open to that. And
I'd be content just to talk about how things are supposed to go, and and like the oh my gosh, the thing that David was reading off of his script, the script and all that stuff, just to make sure, because I know that I don't think either Sean or I really want to screw anything up majorly.
Well, the School of Government, in a publication they have on quasi judicial decision making, they do have a model script for a quasi judicial hearing.
Okay,
That if you got familiar with it, both of you got familiar with it, or at least had it to use. You know, one, it's educational. You know, you kind of tell the public, and if we keep doing these types of hearings, we have a lot of people that are starting to watch these now that they
Okay.
can do it from the comfort of their own home. It could be a good educational opportunity to, hey, this is why we're doing this. This isn't a popularity contest, you know, this. So yeah, that's out there, and I actually already have it typed out. It's just cleaning it up, and
okay.
so
We'll
that's
take a
something
look. I'll start there.
I can get that to you pretty quickly.
I'm sorry, Sean, what?
I was gonna say, I would love a procedural crash course.
Yeah. So perfect. If you can, you know, send that to us or send us the link, and we'll start there. How's that?
Sure, I'll do
Okay.
that.
All right.
So the next item is committee and staff reports.
Anything for planning board?
We did a public hearing last month. We've got one this month, and then planning will meet again. One of them was related to a case we had here about north of King Street off Nash, one of Jim Matheson's properties, that we heard it here as the
Conditional subdivision last year.
Yeah, and then planning just heard the other lot that was in it for rezoning last month. So I think the 27th is when planning will decide that. But yeah, we're in public hearing world right now, and I cannot for the life of me remember the other one we heard about last meeting, and we've got, the 20th is our next meeting. Which
I understand that feeling.
It's past my bedtime.
Yeah.
And I'm on Benadryl.
Staff, I don't really have any staff reports other than we could possibly have some cases for September that are related. I don't know. I had to deliver some bad news last week for a project in the Meadowlands. Actually, two pieces of bad news, but I haven't heard what they're going to do. But they have until August 17th to get in an appeal and a conditional use permit modification, or handle it all under a conditional use permit modification, but it deals with buffers and parking.
I'm well versed in that arena.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, last thing on the agenda is adjournment. Do we have a motion?
Close.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Thank y'all. Good night.
Good
It's
night.
good seeing you all.
Good to see you guys.
Yep.
Jen, go get some sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's allergies. Gosh, they're the worst.